the model that I have of addiction,
Mm-hmm.
which is that it is, I would describe it, and this is very much the 12-step model.
Yeah.
The basic underlying principle of the 12-step model is that addiction is a threefold malady. It's called in the 12-step literature a threefold malady,
Okay.
and that is mental, physical, and what in the 12 steps is called spiritual. And perhaps in a more secular modern society, we could call it social,
Yeah.
or relational.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the malady in those three parts is that there's a deficiency. The 12-step model sees each of those three aspects of the addicted person as being deficient somehow. So the relational deficiency manifests itself as isolation, an inability to feel deeply and truly and intimately connected with people. And then the other two, the mental manifestation, the mental side, the mental deficiency, is manifested as perhaps obsessive thinking, obsessive behaviour, and the obsessive behaviour that results. And then the physical malady, the physical part of the malady, relates to principally to brain chemistry, and to the way that drugs and alcohol and process addictions like gambling argue, and that's a bit of a grey area, but certainly with chemical addictions, there's more and more evidence emerging, and has done so over about the last 10 years, that is beginning to give us a picture of how we are altered. Those people who are addicted, how their brains are altered by the chemicals that they take in, which is really interesting, really, really interesting.
Could you say a little bit about that for us, Mike?
Sure.
Like kind of
Yeah.
what are we learning as we're more able to look into the brain and see what's
Yeah.
happening?
I mean, there is if you want, there's quite a few books out there.
Yeah.
One author that I would recommend looking for is Professor, I think his name is David Nutt,
Yeah. Okay. David Nutt.
and
Great.
N-U-T-T. And I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago he was, I think, the drugs advisor to the government.
Ah. Okay.
And he's done it. He's a, a neuroscientist and a psychologist,
Mm-hmm.
a psychiatrist, and he did a whole load of research into the effect of drugs and alcohol on the brain. And he was fired by the government because they didn't like his conclusions politically.
Really? Oh my
Yes.
goodness. Well, you
Yeah.
need to tell us what you found then.
So what he found
Yeah.
was that for most people, drugs and alcohol do not become addictive.
Wow.
Yeah, and the
How
government doesn't
interesting.
like that, of course.
Right.
Government doesn't like to hear that. It doesn't go along with their. And so he recommended decriminalisation of drugs, and he recommended that we take a whole new kind of social attitude to, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
to the treatment of drug and alcohol abuse.
So he was saying that, like, for most people, they
Yeah,
could take some drugs, take some alcohol, and they're not going to have an addiction. That's not.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I would say that in society, there's quite a lot of people who do go out, say, night clubbing and
Yeah.
take a little bit of ecstasy or a bit of amphetamine or pop some acid or something like that, and they don't get addicted.
Mm.
And most people who go out gambling don't get addicted to gambling,
Right.
majority of the population. But there are some people in whom addiction does form, and there are a number of routes into that.
Mm.
What he found was that there's the mechanism of addiction hinges on various structures in your brain. Some of them are in the limbic system,
Mm-hmm.
which is right in the middle of your brain, and it's one of the most primitive parts of the brain. And then there are other structures in the cortex. And the structures in the limbic system are particularly those concerning the formation of memory. And they are also the structures, this is the really crucial part, that they're the structures that regulate the release of dopamine.